I'm 68 years old now, and for 42 years I kept the most impossible secret anyone could imagine. In the forest behind my cabin, hidden from the world, lived a creature that scientists swore was impossible to exist. His name was Magnus, at least that's what I called him. And he was a Bigfoot. I found him when I was 26 years old, dying in the mountains of Northern California in 1983. And I made a decision that day that would change both our lives forever. This is the story of how an ordinary man became the guardian of something extraordinary, and why I finally decided it was time to tell the truth. But before I continue, if you enjoy stories that challenge everything we think we know about the world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. And if this story moves you, leave your like. It really helps the channel grow. March 1983. Winter had been brutal in the Klamath Mountains of Northern California, where I'd lived since I was 20. I inherited the property from my grandfather, 50 acres of dense forest, with a small cabin and a workshop isolated enough that my nearest neighbor was 4 miles away. It was perfect for someone like me, who preferred the solitude of trees to the noise of cities. My name is Thomas Brennan, and back then I was just a quiet guy trying to make a living as a hunting and fishing guide. I'd take tourists into the mountains, teach wilderness survival, repair equipment. It was honest work and it paid the bills. I lived alone, never married, content with my books, my workshop, and the vastness of the forest. On March 19, 1983, I was checking rabbit traps when I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, a deep, agonized moan that echoed through the pine trees. It wasn't human, but it wasn't completely animal either. There was something in that sound that conveyed conscious pain, intelligent suffering. I grabbed my rifle because bear territory meant always entering the forest armed, and followed toward the sound. I walked maybe half a mile, climbing a rocky slope until I found the source. At first I thought it was an injured grizzly bear, but as I got closer, pushing through the snow-covered bushes, I realized it was something completely different. It was lying on its side near a ravine, and it was immense, at least 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur, matted with blood and ice. The arms were too long, the shoulders too broad, and the face, my God, the face was something I'd never seen. Almost human, but not quite. Heavy brow, broad nose, eyes that were full of pain, and something that looked like intelligence. A Bigfoot, a real, living Bigfoot, injured and dying on my property. My first instinct was to run. Every campfire story, every warning about creatures in the forests came flooding into my mind. But then he looked at me, and I saw something in those eyes that stopped me completely. It wasn't animal awareness. It was understanding, recognition, fear. He was afraid of me. I lowered my rifle slowly. "Easy," I said, though I had no idea if he could understand me. "I'm not going to hurt you." I moved closer, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. That's when I saw the injury. His right leg was severely lacerated, probably from a fall down the nearby ravine. The bone was exposed in some places, and infection was already setting in. The wound was at least a few days old, and without treatment he would die. The creature made that sound again, softer this time. He wasn't trying to threaten me. He was asking for help. I'd worked with injured animals before, deer, coyotes, even helped a bear cub once. But this was different. This was something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that, if discovered, would bring scientists, government agents, hunters, and God knows who else to my property. But looking at that creature suffering in the snow, I couldn't just walk away. "Okay," I said, more to myself than to him. "Okay, let's see what we can do." I ran back to my cabin and grabbed my first aid kit, veterinary supplies I kept for emergencies, and a bottle of whiskey, the only anesthetic I had. When I returned, the creature was still there, watching me approach with wary eyes. "This is going to hurt," I told him, opening the whiskey bottle. "But if we don't clean this wound, the infection will kill you." I poured whiskey over my hands and over the exposed wound. The creature tensed, making sounds of pain, but didn't try to attack me. He seemed to understand I was trying to help. It took me almost 2 hours to clean the wound as best I could. I used boiled water, antiseptic, and clean bandages to wrap the leg. The creature endured it all with extraordinary resilience, trembling with pain but never trying to push me away. When I finished, he was exhausted, but the bleeding had stopped and the wound was clean. "You can't stay here," I said, sitting back on my heels, exhausted. "You need shelter, food, a safe place to recover. Can you walk?" The creature tried to stand, but immediately collapsed. His leg couldn't support any weight. I looked around at the forest, then back at the creature. If I left him here, he would die. Other animals would find him, or he'd succumb to infection. And if someone else found him first, I made a decision that would define the next 42 years of my life. "My workshop," I said. "It's not far. I can help you there, but you have to trust me." Over the next 4 hours, using a combination of encouraging words and physical support, I helped the creature make his way back to my property. It was agonizingly slow, and I had to practically carry him the last 100 yards. By the time we reached my workshop, we were both completely exhausted. The workshop was old but solid, with a hayloft and several stalls that hadn't housed animals in years. I'd been using it for storage, old furniture, tools, lumber. I cleared out the largest stall and helped the creature inside, piling hay to make a soft place to rest. "Stay here," I told him. "I'll bring food and water. We need to keep you hidden. Nobody can know you're here. Do you understand?" The creature looked at me with those intelligent eyes and made a soft sound. Then, impossibly, he nodded, a clear, deliberate nod of understanding. "My God," I whispered, "you really do understand." I spent the rest of that day and night tending to the creature. I brought water, which he drank gratefully. Food was trickier. I offered bread, which he refused, then jerky, which he accepted. I changed his bandages, applied more antiseptic, and watched for signs of fever or worsening infection. The creature, I couldn't keep thinking of him as it, watched me work with what seemed like curiosity. When I brought my gas lantern so I could see better in the dim workshop, he reached out and touched the glass gently, fascinated by the light. "You've never seen modern things before, have you?" I said. "You've been living out there in the wild your whole life, avoiding people, staying hidden." He made a sound that might have been agreement. Over the next few days, as I continued treating the injury, something remarkable happened. We began to communicate. Not with words, the creature's vocal anatomy couldn't produce human speech, I realized, but with gestures, sounds, and expressions. He learned to nod for yes and shake his head for no. He would point at things he needed or wanted. And he began making different vocalizations that I gradually learned to interpret. One sound for pain, another for hunger, another for gratitude. By the end of the first week, the infection was receding and the leg was starting to heal. The creature could put a little weight on it, though it would be weeks before he could walk properly. And by then, I'd made another decision. Even after he recovered, I couldn't let him go back into the wild. Not yet, maybe not ever. Because on March 22nd, just 3 days after I'd found him, federal agents had shown up in the town of Eureka, 15 miles away. They were asking about unusual animal sightings, large tracks, strange sounds in the forests. Someone had reported something, and the government was investigating. I'd heard about this before. Whispered stories about government agents searching for Bigfoot, rumors of creatures being captured and taken to secret facilities. I didn't know if the stories were true, but I couldn't risk finding out. So the creature stayed in my workshop, and as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, something unexpected happened. We became friends. I named him Magnus because of his immense size and powerful presence. Magnus seemed to accept the name, responding when I said it. He was male. I confirmed that while treating his injuries, probably in his 20s, based on my best guess about age indicators. Magnus was incredibly intelligent. Within a month, he'd learned dozens of gestures we could use to communicate. He understood that he needed to stay hidden, and he never made loud sounds during the day when someone might hear. He learned my daily routine and would wait patiently for me to bring food and water, but he was also lonely. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in the soft sounds he'd make at night when he thought I couldn't hear. He missed his kind, missed the forest, missed his freedom. "I'm sorry," I told him one evening as summer turned to fall. "I know this isn't fair, but if they find you, they'll take you away, lock you up, study you, maybe maybe worse. At least here, you're safe." Magnus looked at me with those sad, intelligent eyes. Then he placed one massive hand on my shoulder, gently, carefully, aware of his own strength, a gesture that said, "I understand. Thank you for protecting me." That was September 1983. Ronald Reagan was president. MTV was playing music videos non-stop, and the world had no idea that in a small workshop in California, a man and a Bigfoot were forming an unlikely friendship that would last more than 4 decades. By October, Magnus's leg had healed enough that he could walk again, though with a slight limp that would never completely go away. He could have left. The workshop door was never locked, but he stayed. Maybe because he felt safe. Maybe because he'd been alone too and had found companionship. Or maybe because he understood what I was offering, protection from a world that would never accept what he was. Whatever the reason, Magnus stayed, and I kept his secret day after day, month after month, year after year. Living with Magnus required completely restructuring my life. The workshop became his permanent home, and I spent months making it more comfortable for him. I insulated the walls for winter, installed a wood stove for heat, and created a space where he could move around freely without being visible from outside. The biggest challenge was food. Magnus was large, probably around 600 pounds, and needed a lot to eat. His natural diet was omnivorous: meat, fish, berries, roots, nuts. I couldn't just buy enough groceries for 2 without raising suspicions, so I had to be creative. I started hunting more, telling people in town I was selling deer meat to cover my increased ammunition purchases. I planted a massive vegetable garden, explaining it as a new hobby. I drove to different towns to buy groceries, so no single store would notice how much I was purchasing. Every trip required careful planning to avoid drawing attention. Magnus adapted to his new life remarkably well. He was naturally nocturnal, which helped. He'd sleep during the day when I was working and be active at night when there was no risk of being seen. I'd spend my evenings in the workshop with him, and we developed routines that felt almost domestic. He was fascinated by human things. I brought him books, and while he couldn't read, he'd study the pictures for hours. I had an old radio in the workshop, and he loved listening to music, classical especially, which seemed to calm him. When MTV started playing music videos, I brought in a small TV with a VCR, and Magnus would watch for hours, utterly captivated by the moving image. "You're probably the only Bigfoot in the world who's seen Michael Jackson's Thriller video," I told him one night in 1985, watching him watch the TV with wonder in his eyes. He made a sound that I'd learned meant amusement. If he could have laughed, he would have. But there were dangerous moments, especially in those first years. In April 1985, a severe storm damaged my workshop's roof. I had to hire a contractor to fix it, which meant Magnus had to hide in the hayloft under blankets and tarps for 4 days while workers were on the property. I stayed with him the whole time, terrified one of them would hear him breathing or moving. "Just a little longer," I whispered to him as hammers pounded overhead. "Stay quiet, stay still." Magnus remained perfectly motionless for hours at a time. His self-control was extraordinary. When the workers finally left and I removed the coverings, he was stiff and uncomfortable, but had made no sound that would have betrayed his presence. In September 1986, a forest fire came within 3 miles of my property. Evacuation orders were issued, and the police came door to door to make sure everyone left. I told them I'd evacuated, then snuck back to stay with Magnus. "I'm not leaving you," I said, as smoke filled the air and ash fell like snow. "If this place burns, we burn together." Magnus looked at me with what I can only describe as gratitude mixed with concern. He placed his hand over his chest, then pointed at me, then at the forest. He was telling me to save myself, that I didn't have to stay. "Yes, I do," I replied. "You're my responsibility now, my friend. Friends don't abandon each other." The fire changed direction that night, sparing my property by less than a mile. When the evacuation order was lifted and I returned home, I told everyone I'd been staying with friends in Reading. Nobody questioned it. The years passed, and Magnus and I fell into a rhythm. I learned more about him than probably any human had ever learned about his species. He was incredibly strong. I once saw him lift a 300-pound beam of wood with one hand. He was agile despite his size, able to climb to the top of the workshop in seconds using the support beams. His senses were far superior to mine. He could hear my truck coming from a mile and a half away. He could smell when someone was approaching the property long before I could see them. His night vision was perfect. He could navigate the workshop in complete darkness with no difficulty. But most impressively, he was emotionally complex. He experienced joy, sadness, loneliness, fear, and affection. He had a sense of humor. He'd sometimes hide my tools as a joke, then make that amused sound when I couldn't find them. He could be playful, gentle, thoughtful. In 1988, I made a major modification to the property. I told people in town I was building a large storage shed, but actually I was creating a tunnel system connecting the workshop to a section of fenced forest area where Magnus could go outside safely at night. 20 feet of underground tunnel reinforced with timber and concrete, opening into a quarter-acre enclosure surrounded by 12-foot-tall fencing camouflaged to look like natural forest. It took me 7 months working every evening, but when it was finished, Magnus had access to open air and real trees for the first time in 4 years. The first night he went outside, he stood under the stars for an hour, just looking up at the sky. I stood watching him from the tunnel entrance, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I know it's not the same as real freedom," I said quietly, "but it's something." He made a soft sound and placed his hand on his chest, over his heart. "Thank you." By 1990, we developed an even more sophisticated communication system. I made flashcards with simple pictures and words, teaching him to associate images with meanings. He learned to point at cards, to communicate more complex ideas. He learned numbers, could understand time by showing him clock faces to explain when I'd return, and even grasp basic concepts like days of the week. "You're smarter than most people I know," I told him one evening, as he correctly identified a sequence of cards. "If the world knew what you really are, what you're capable of." But that was exactly why the world couldn't know. The dangerous moments continued through the years. In 1992, a backpacker got lost and wandered onto my property. I found him near the workshop, exhausted and dehydrated. I gave him water and directions back to the main trail, all while Magnus remained absolutely silent inside, just 20 feet from the stranger. In 1994, property values in the area started rising and developers began buying land. A real estate agent visited, asking if I'd be interested in selling. She walked around the property, getting far too close to the workshop for my comfort. "That's a nice workshop," she said. "Good structure. A buyer could convert it into a guest house or studio." "Not for sale," I said firmly. "This property stays in the family. Everything's for sale at the right price, Mr. Brennan. Not this, not ever." She left disappointed, but came back twice more over the following months with increasingly generous offers. Each time I refused. Magnus was more important than any amount of money. As the 90s progressed, I began to worry about the future. I was in my late 30s, healthy and strong, but I wouldn't be forever. What would happen to Magnus when I got old, when I died? He'd been living in that workshop for nearly a decade by then. He'd lost his survival skills for the wild. He depended on me completely. I started setting aside money, making plans. I bought the surrounding properties as they came up for sale. Another 40 acres in 1995, 60 more in 1997. By 1999, I owned 140 acres of forest, creating a larger buffer zone between Magnus and the outside world. I also documented everything in journals. How to care for Magnus, his dietary needs, his health issues. He'd developed arthritis in the leg that had been trapped, his preferences, his routines. If something happened to me, whoever found these journals would at least know how to take care of him. Magnus seemed to sense my concerns. One evening in 2000, 17 years after I'd found him, he did something remarkable. Using the picture cards, he created a sequence. A picture of me, a picture of him, a picture of a house, and a picture of a heart. "You and me, home, love," I interpreted. "This is our home. We're family." He nodded emphatically, then pointed at me and made a gesture I'd come to recognize. his hand over his heart, then extended toward me, his way of saying he was grateful, that he cared for me. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "We're family. You're stuck with me for the long haul." As the year 2000 approached and the world worried about Y2K, I worried about different things. Magnus was middle-aged now, probably around 40 years old by my estimates. I was 43. We'd spent nearly half our lives together, hidden from the world, creating our own small universe in that workshop and the forest around it. I'd sacrificed a normal life for this. No wife, no kids, no close friendships. Maintaining Magnus's secret meant keeping everyone at arm's length. My existence revolved around protecting him, providing for him, keeping him safe and hidden. But watching him that New Year's Eve, sitting peacefully in the workshop, listening to classical music on the radio as the year 2000 arrived, I knew I'd made the right choice. The world might see him as a monster or a curiosity, but I saw him as what he really was, a person. Different from me, certainly, but a thinking, feeling person who deserved dignity, safety, and kindness. And I'd keep protecting him, no matter what it cost me, for as long as I lived. The 2000s brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Technology was advancing rapidly, and with it came new threats to Magnus's secrecy. Satellite imagery became more detailed and accessible. Google Earth launched in 2005, and suddenly anyone with internet could view aerial photos of properties, including mine. I became paranoid about what might be visible from above. I built additional roof structures over the outdoor enclosure, making it look like natural tree canopy. I planted fast-growing trees strategically to block sightlines. I even researched thermal imaging technology, worried that someone might detect Magnus's heat signature. "The world's getting smaller," I told Magnus one evening in 2007. "Harder to keep secrets. Everyone's got cameras now, internet, GPS. We have to be more careful than ever." Magnus, now in his 60s by my estimation, nodded slowly. He understood. His fur had started graying around the face and shoulders, and his movements were stiffer than they'd been 20 years ago. The arthritis in his leg bothered him more, especially in cold weather. I was 50 then, and I'd started feeling my age too. Years of guide work had taken their toll on my back and knees. I worried about what would happen when I couldn't physically care for Magnus anymore, when climbing ladders to repair the workshop became too risky, when carrying heavy loads of food became impossible. In 2009, I made a decision that scared me, but felt necessary. I needed help, but not from strangers. I reached out to my niece, Rachel Brennan, who was 25 and working as a wildlife biologist in Oregon. Rachel had always been a good kid, responsible, trustworthy, someone who respected nature and privacy. More importantly, she was family. If anyone could keep this secret, it would be her. I invited her to visit for a week in July 2009. On the third day there, after we'd spent time reconnecting and I'd evaluated her character once more, I decided to take the risk. "Rachel, I need to show you something," I said. "What you're about to see, you can never tell anyone. Not your parents, not your boyfriend, not your biologist colleagues. If you can't promise that, absolutely, we stop right here." Rachel looked concerned, but intrigued. "Uncle Thomas, are you in trouble? Is this illegal?" "It's not illegal exactly, but if anyone found out, they'd take away something very important to me. Someone very important. Someone." I led her to the workshop. Magnus was in the outdoor enclosure, which I could access through the tunnel. I told Magnus that morning that someone I knew was coming, someone I trusted, and he needed to be calm and not afraid. When Rachel saw Magnus standing under the trees, she literally fell backwards, scrambling away in shock. "My God, that's a Bigfoot." "His name is Magnus," I said calmly, "and he's been living here since 1983. 26 years, Rachel. I found him dying in a trap, and I've been protecting him ever since." Rachel couldn't form words. She just stared, mouth open, as Magnus watched her with cautious eyes. "He's intelligent, Rachel. As smart as you or me, maybe smarter in some ways. He understands English, communicates through gestures and pictures. He's gentle, kind, and he's my best friend. He's also terrified right now because there's a stranger here, so I need you to calm down." It took Rachel an hour to process what she was seeing. She asked 100 questions, which I answered patiently. Finally, She looked at me with something like awe. Uncle Thomas, do you understand what this means? This is the most important zoological discovery in history. Scientists would lock him up, study him like a lab animal, make him famous, take away every bit of dignity and freedom he has left. I interrupted. I know what scientists would do, Rachel. That's why no one can ever know. But there's no but. Magnus is a person, not a specimen. He has rights, even if the law doesn't recognize them. He has feelings, preferences, fears. He deserves to live in peace, not in a zoo or research facility. Rachel spent the rest of that week getting to know Magnus. By the end, she understood why I'd kept the secret. She promised to help, to be there if something happened to me, to take over Magnus's care if necessary. Thank you, I told her as she left. You've just made yourself responsible for the biggest secret in the world. I won't let you down, Uncle Thomas or Magnus. Having Rachel know was both a relief and a new anxiety. But as the years passed and she kept her word, never telling anyone, visiting regularly to help with heavier work, I knew I'd made the right choice. In 2010, I turned 52 and Magnus was probably around 68. We were both slowing down, but our routines remained stable. Magnus had his outdoor time each night, his meals, his music and television. I'd upgraded to a Blu-ray player and Magnus had developed favorite movies. He particularly loved nature documentaries. I think he missed the wild world he'd once known. But that year brought an unexpected crisis. In November 2010, during a routine visit, Rachel noticed Magnus was moving strangely. Uncle Thomas, something's wrong. Look at how he's breathing. Magnus was wheezing, struggling to catch his breath. His color was off, and he seemed disoriented. I'd seen him sick before, colds, minor infections, but this was different. I think it's his heart, I said, panic rising. Or pneumonia, maybe. Rachel, what do I do? I can't take him to a vet. I can't take him to a doctor. Do you have a stethoscope? First aid training? Basic stuff, but nothing for something serious. Rachel made a decision. I know someone, a veterinarian friend who works with large animals. She's discreet, doesn't ask questions. Let me call her. Rachel, no. Uncle Thomas, if we don't do something, Magnus could die. Trust me on this. Dr. Jennifer Martinez arrived the next morning believing she was coming to treat a large exotic animal that a biologist friend's uncle kept illegally. Rachel had been deliberately vague. When she saw Magnus, she went silent for a full minute. That's not possible, she finally whispered. It's possible and it's real, and he's dying, I said. Can you help him? Jennifer, to her credit, pulled herself together quickly. She examined Magnus, who was too sick to be frightened of yet another stranger. Her diagnosis was pneumonia, severe but treatable if we acted quickly. He needs antibiotics, respiratory support and monitoring. I can do this. But she looked at me and Rachel. This is real. You're hiding a living Bigfoot. For 27 years, yes, I said. And if you tell anyone, they'll take him away from me. Please. Jennifer thought for a long moment, then nodded. I'll help, but you two owe me every detail about how this happened. She treated Magnus for 3 weeks, visiting daily, bringing medications and equipment. Magnus's fever broke on day 6, and by day 12, he was breathing normally again. Jennifer refused payment, saying the experience was compensation enough. He's remarkable, she told me. Physiologically similar to great apes, but with unique adaptations. His lung capacity is extraordinary, probably why he survived pneumonia that would have killed a human. And Thomas, he trusts you completely. The bond you two have is something I've never seen between human and animal. He's not an animal, I corrected gently. He's a person, different but a person. Jennifer nodded slowly. Yes, I can see that now. She became part of our small circle of trust. 3 people in the world knew about Magnus, and all 3 committed to protecting him. The 2010s brought more changes. I turned 62 in 2019, officially a senior citizen, though I felt older. My back was bad, my knees worse, and I'd had a minor heart attack in 2017 that scared me badly. Magnus was in his 70s now, moving slowly, sleeping more, eating less. We were both getting old, and I was increasingly aware that our time together was finite. Rachel visited more frequently, bringing her husband Peter into the secret in 2018 when they got married. Peter, an environmental engineer, was overwhelmed but adapted quickly. He helped Jennifer monitor Magnus's health, documenting everything scientifically. "Uncle Thomas, you've kept detailed records for over 35 years, Peter said, reading through my journals. This is invaluable data about an unknown species. Even if Magnus is the last of his kind, this information could." "No publication," I said firmly. "Not while he's alive, not while it could lead people here. After we're both gone, you can decide what to do with it, but not before." "I understand," he said. "But Thomas, what if he's not the last? What if there are others out there who could benefit from what you've learned about his care, his needs?" It was a question I'd asked myself 1,000 times. Were there others like Magnus, hiding in the deep wilderness, struggling to survive? If there were, could my knowledge help them? But the risk was too great. Revealing what I knew meant revealing Magnus's existence. And I'd promised him 40 years ago that I'd keep him safe. In 2020, Magnus's health started declining more noticeably. He was eating less, moving with difficulty, spending most of his time sleeping. Jennifer examined him and confirmed what I'd feared. "He's dying, Thomas. Not immediately, but his systems are shutting down gradually. Old age. He might have a few more years, but he's in the final stage of life." I sat with Magnus that evening, my hand on his massive shoulder, both of us old and tired and facing the end. "You've had a good life," I told him. "Safe, comfortable, loved. That's more than a lot of humans get. I hope you don't regret staying here with me all these years." Magnus placed his hand over mine, then pointed at me, at himself, at the heart symbol he'd drawn on cards decades ago. "No regrets. Family, love." "Yeah," I said, tears in my eyes. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Magnus lived longer than Jennifer predicted. Throughout 2021 and 2022, while the world dealt with multiple crises, Magnus and I dealt with our own quiet crisis of aging and mortality. The isolation that everyone else suddenly experienced was nothing new to us. We'd been isolated together for 38 years by then. It actually helped us in one way. With fewer visitors to the area, there was less risk of discovery. Rachel and Peter moved into the old house on one of my other properties, ostensibly to help me, but really to provide daily assistance with Magnus's care. Magnus's world had shrunk to just the workshop now. He no longer had the strength to navigate the tunnel to the outdoor enclosure. His arthritis was severe, and he spent most of his time on a specially built bed we'd constructed. Essentially, a large platform with thick padding that could support his weight while keeping him comfortable. But his mind remained sharp. He still enjoyed his music, still watched nature documentaries on the TV we'd mounted, where he could see it easily. He still communicated with us through gestures and his picture cards, though his movements were slower, more deliberate. In August 2022, I turned 65. Magnus was probably around 80 or 81. We'd been together for 39 years, more than half my life and more than half of his. "Do you remember when we met?" I asked him one evening, sitting beside his bed. "You were trapped, dying, and I was just a guy who couldn't leave an injured creature to suffer. I never planned any of this, never imagined we'd spend 4 decades together." Magnus made a soft sound and pointed at a card showing 2 figures side by side. Then he pointed at me, at himself, and placed his hand over his heart. "Brothers," I said, understanding. "Yeah, we became brothers, didn't we?" He nodded slowly, his eyes still intelligent despite his body's decline, filled with what I can only describe as love. In January 2023, Magnus stopped eating regularly. Jennifer examined him and found nothing acutely wrong, just the general systems failure of extreme old age. She increased his pain medication and made him as comfortable as possible. It could be days or weeks, she told me privately, but Thomas, you need to prepare yourself, and you need to think about what happens after. After? I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. His body. We can't just bury him in the forest like a pet. He's important, Thomas. What he represents, what you've documented about him. The scientific community, the world should know he existed. I promised him secrecy. You promised him protection while he was alive. After he's gone, Jennifer paused. That promise changes. I didn't want to think about it, but she was right. Magnus's death would raise questions I'd been avoiding for years. What would we do with his remains? How could we honor his life while respecting the secret we'd kept? Rachel had a different perspective. Uncle Thomas, you've hidden Magnus for almost 40 years. That's an incredible act of love and protection. But when he's gone, don't you think the world deserves to know that these creatures existed, that one of them trusted a human enough to spend his whole life with him? The government will come, I said. They'll take him, take my journals, classify everything. His memory will disappear into some vault. What if we controlled the narrative? Peter suggested. What if we documented everything first? Photographs, videos, DNA samples. What if we went public immediately after he passes, so widely and publicly that the government can't suppress it? That's dangerous, Jennifer warned. Thomas could face legal consequences. Harboring an endangered species without permits, if they decide to classify it that way, he could lose everything. I'm 65 years old, I said. I've lived my life. If telling Magnus's story costs me my freedom or my property, maybe that's a price worth paying. He deserves to be remembered as more than a myth. We spent the spring of 2023 preparing. Peter took hundreds of photographs of Magnus, documenting his physical characteristics, his living space, his picture cards. Everything. Rachel recorded videos of Magnus communicating, responding to questions, showing his intelligence and personality. Jennifer collected blood and hair samples for DNA analysis at a private lab she trusted. I organized my journal, 39 years of daily notes about Magnus's life, behavior, diet, health, emotions. It was the most complete documentation of a Bigfoot's existence ever compiled. Magnus seemed to understand what we were doing. He cooperated with the photographs and videos, even appeared to pose occasionally. On good days, he'd demonstrate his communication skills, pointing at picture cards to answer Rachel's questions. Why do you think he's okay with this? Rachel asked me. If he's lived in hiding all these years, why allow us to document everything now? Because he knows he's dying, I said, and maybe on some level, he wants to be remembered, wants his kind to be known, even if he's the only one we've ever confirmed. On June 14th, 2023, Magnus's condition deteriorated rapidly. We all gathered in the workshop, me, Rachel, Peter, and Jennifer. Magnus was struggling to breathe, clearly in pain despite the medication. Is he suffering? I asked Jennifer. Yes, his lungs are failing. It won't be much longer. I sat beside Magnus's bed, holding his massive hand in mine. It's okay, buddy. You can let go. You've fought long enough. You've lived a good life, been loved, been safe. That's all anyone can ask for. Magnus's eyes focused on me. He squeezed my hand weakly, then did something he'd never done before. He vocalized words, or something close to words. His vocal anatomy couldn't produce human speech perfectly, but I could make out the sounds. Tu mas. Thank you. 39 years of communication through gestures and pictures, and in his final moments, he found a way to say my name and thank me. You're welcome, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for 42 years of companionship. I love you, Magnus. He made one last soft sound, squeezed my hand once more, and then his breathing stopped. The workshop fell silent except for my sobs and Rachel's quiet crying. Magnus was gone. We sat with him for hours, none of us ready to leave. Finally, as dawn broke on June 15th, 2023, we began the process we'd planned. Jennifer performed a complete examination and collected tissue samples for preservation. Peter and Rachel took final photographs and measurements. I wrote the final entry in my journal. June 15th, 2023. Magnus passed away peacefully at approximately 4:15 a.m. with his family present. He was approximately 80 to 81 years old and had lived with me for 39 years, 9 months, and 3 days. The world has lost something irreplaceable. We preserved his body in a refrigerated storage unit we'd prepared, keeping it at a constant temperature while we made our next moves. According to our plan, we'd go public in stages. First, Rachel and Peter published their documentation online, photographs, videos, and scientific analysis through multiple channels simultaneously to prevent suppression. They sent packages to major news outlets, scientific journals, and cryptozoology organizations. Second, Jennifer submitted her DNA analysis to a peer-reviewed genetics journal under her name. detailing the samples from an unidentified North American hominid without revealing the full story yet. Third, I prepared to give an interview to a major news network, telling the complete story of Magnus's life and my 40 years protecting him. We launched everything on June 25, 2023, exactly 10 days after Magnus's death. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Within hours, my property was surrounded by news vans, reporters, government vehicles, and curiosity seekers. My phone rang constantly until I unplugged it. The internet exploded with debate. Was this real? An elaborate hoax? The discovery of the century? Federal agents arrived on June 26th, demanding access to Magnus's remains and all documentation. I let them in, showing them everything. The senior agent, a woman named Dr. Catherine Hayes, examined Magnus's body for a long time before speaking. "Mr. Brennan, do you understand the legal complications of what you've done? Harboring an unknown species, preventing scientific study, withholding information from federal authorities. I understand I protected a living, intelligent being from being captured and experimented on," I interrupted. "I gave him a life of dignity and safety. If that's illegal, then charge me." Hayes looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. Brennan, there have been rumors of these creatures for decades. Reports, sightings, alleged government knowledge. What you've done here is provide undeniable proof. This body, your documentation, the DNA evidence, it's all real, and it's going to change everything." "Good," I said. "It should. Magnus deserves to be known. His species deserves recognition. Protection. If there are others out there, maybe now we can protect them instead of hiding them." "You may have just triggered the biggest cryptozoological and anthropological crisis in history," Hayes said. "I hope you're ready for the consequences." "I've had 40 years to prepare," I replied. "I'm ready." The months following our revelation were chaos. My property became a permanent camp for media, scientists, government officials, and protesters arguing about what should happen to Magnus's remains. I gave dozens of interviews, showing my journals, the workshop where he'd lived, the communication system we'd developed over 40 years. The DNA analysis confirmed what we documented. Magnus was indeed a previously unidentified hominid species, genetically positioned between modern humans and extinct archaic humans like Neanderthals. The scientific community was split between those amazed by the discovery and those skeptical it could have remained hidden so long. In September 2023, the federal government officially classified Magnus's species as critically endangered, possibly extinct, and established a task force to investigate whether other populations existed. They offered me immunity from prosecution in exchange for full cooperation and consultation on any conservation efforts. "They want you to help them find more," Peter said as we read through the legal documents. "After 40 years of hiding Magnus, they want you to help search for his kind. If there are others out there," I said, "they deserve protection, real protection, not just monitoring and secrecy. Magnus lived in hiding because he was terrified of humans. Maybe we can create a world where his kind don't have to live in fear." But the government had a different revelation for me. In October 2023, Dr. Hayes returned with classified documents. "Mr. Brennan, what I'm about to tell you has been kept secret for decades. The government has been aware of Bigfoot populations since the 1960s. We've been monitoring them, protecting their habitats covertly, and maintaining strict information control to prevent exactly the kind of chaos your revelation has caused." I stared at her. "You knew all this time while I was hiding Magnus, terrified you'd find him and take him away. You already knew these creatures existed?" "We knew they existed in the wild. We had no idea someone had one living on their property for 40 years. Mr. Brennan, the reason we suppressed information wasn't to deny their existence, but to protect them from hunters, trophy seekers, and overzealous scientists. Your revelation has put every remaining population at risk." "Then protect them publicly," I said. "Make their habitat legally protected. Enforce penalties for harming them. Stop pretending they don't exist and actually do something. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You've been hiding the truth to make your jobs easier, not to protect these creatures." Magnus lived for 40 years in a workshop because he was too terrified to be free. That's not protection. That's just a different kind of prison. The debate raged through 2023 and 2024. Environmental groups pushed for official Endangered Species Act protection. Hunting organizations argued about whether Bigfoot should be legal game if it was just an animal. Ethicists debated whether a humanoid species should have legal personhood. Magnus's body remained in federal custody, being studied by multiple research teams. They confirmed everything I documented: his intelligence, his physical adaptations, his capacity for emotion and communication. Some scientists proposed he be displayed at the Smithsonian, a monument to an unknown species. Others argued his remains should be returned to the wild, buried in the forest he'd been taken from 40 years earlier. I fought for the latter. Magnus lived his entire adult life in hiding to avoid being a spectacle. You will not make him one in death. In March 2025, a compromise was reached. Magnus's remains would be cremated and his ashes scattered in the Klamath Mountains near where I'd found him. A small portion of tissue samples would be preserved for future genetic research. My journals and documentation would be archived at the Smithsonian, available to researchers but not sensationalized for public display. The ceremony was held on March 19th, 2025, exactly 42 years after I'd found Magnus trapped in that clearing. Rachel, Peter, Jennifer and I, along with a small group of scientists and government officials who'd worked on the case, hiked to the location. I carried Magnus's ashes in a simple wooden box I'd made in my workshop, one last carpentry project for my old friend. When we reached the spot, I opened the box and scattered the ashes among the trees where he'd once lived free. Magnus was more than a scientific specimen, I said to the gathered witnesses. He was a person. He had preferences, emotions, memories. He loved classical music and nature documentaries. He had a sense of humor. He grieved, he laughed, he felt fear and joy and affection. For 40 years, he was my family, and I was his. He trusted me when he had no reason to trust any human. He stayed when he could have left. He gave me companionship and purpose, and in return, I gave him safety and dignity. That's what I want people to remember. Not just that Bigfoot is real, but that they're worthy of our respect, our protection, and our compassion. I scattered the last of the ashes. Rest easy, buddy. You're home now. The aftermath of Magnus's revelation continued to unfold through 2025. Several credible sightings were reported and investigated, though no other individuals were captured or confirmed. Habitat protection laws were passed in several states, creating large wilderness preserves where the creatures might exist undisturbed. In June 2025, I turned 68. Magnus had been gone for 2 years. The workshop where he'd lived still stood, but it was empty now. I'd removed everything. The bed we'd built, the TV and Blu-ray player, the picture cards we'd used to communicate. All of it was archived, documented, preserved as evidence of a 42-year experiment in interspecies friendship. I gave my final major interview in July 2025, sitting on the porch of my house, looking out at the forest that had been Magnus's prison and sanctuary. "Do you regret it?" the reporter asked. 42 years of your life devoted to hiding and protecting Magnus. You never married, never had children, never lived a normal life. Do you regret that choice? I thought about it for a long moment. I regret that he needed to be hidden at all. I regret that the world wasn't safe for him to live freely. I regret that he spent his entire adult life in a workshop instead of in these forests where he belonged. But do I regret knowing him, protecting him, loving him? Never, not for a second. What do you hope Magnus's legacy will be? I hope people understand that there's more to this world than we think we know, that there are mysteries still hiding in the wild places, and they deserve our protection, not our exploitation. And I hope that if there are others like Magnus out there, they're treated with the respect and dignity he deserved, but only found with me. What would you say to Magnus if you could speak to him one more time? I looked out at the forest, at the mountains beyond, at the sky where I like to imagine Magnus might be, finally free, I'd say thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for 42 years of companionship. Thank you for teaching me that intelligence and emotion aren't unique to humans, that family can take forms we never expect, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is protect someone who can't protect themselves. And I'd tell him, I'm sorry. Sorry it took me so long to tell his story. Sorry the world wasn't ready for him. Sorry he had to live his life in hiding. But mostly, I'd tell him what I told him every night for 42 years, that he was loved, that he mattered, and that his life had meaning beyond what anyone else would understand. The reporter turned off her recorder. That's beautiful, Mr. Brennan. Thank you. After she left, I sat on that porch until sunset, just like I used to do before I'd go out to the workshop to spend the evening with Magnus. The routine was so ingrained that I still felt the pull, still had the urge to walk out there and check on him, but the workshop was empty. Magnus was gone. The secret was revealed, and I was just an old man living alone in the forests, with nothing left but memories and the knowledge that I'd done something extraordinary, even if the world hadn't known it for 42 years. Rachel and Peter visit regularly. Jennifer stops by to check on me. They worry I'm lonely, that I'm lost without Magnus. Maybe I am. 42 years is a long time to dedicate to one purpose, one friendship. What do you do when that's gone? But I have the journals, I have the photographs, I have 42 years of memories of a friendship that shouldn't have been possible, but was. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that Magnus's story is out there now, that his existence mattered, that he'll be remembered not as a myth, but as a real, thinking, feeling person who deserved better than what the world would have given him. In my bedroom, I keep one thing, Magnus's favorite picture card. It shows two stick figures side by side with a heart between them. Family, love, brotherhood. That's what we were. That's what we'll always be, even though he's gone. I'm 68 years old. I hid a living Bigfoot from the government for 42 years, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, because some friendships are worth any sacrifice. Some secrets are kept not out of shame, but out of love. And sometimes the most remarkable thing an ordinary person can do is recognize that something extraordinary deserves protection, dignity, and respect. That was Magnus's gift to me, the privilege of protecting him, of knowing him, of being his friend. And that's a gift I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.